Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. Over the last few weeks, we've been discussing potential geopolitical scenarios that could unfold for many nations in 2026. The previous episodes have explored many countries in Africa, the United States, Venezuela, and Argentina. Today, we're going to continue this series, exploring potential geopolitical developments that could unfold for Brazil in 2026. Brazil is a regional heavyweight in South America. The nation seeks to manage relations with both the United States and China, a lot more than Argentina does, which very clearly aligns with the United States, as we discussed in the Argentina episode. In fact, if we had to choose which way Brazil leans between the United States and China, they do seem to lean closer to China. China is Brazil's largest trading partner, accounting for between 28 and 30% of Brazilian exports and 22 to 25% of Brazilian imports. Brazil is a member of BRICS, and despite not being active in the recent military coordination that we saw between many members of the group, Brazil does advocate for a multipolar world and for greater global South cooperation. On the flip side, Trump and the United States are very clearly set on the Monroe Doctrine and securing the Western Hemisphere. We did see relations between Trump and Lula escalate during 2025 before a meeting in Malaysia calmed tensions. Could we see escalation once again in 2026? This meeting in Malaysia is notable because it led to tariff exceptions on key Brazilian exports, such as coffee and beef, into the United States. Also, the average tariff on Brazilian imports fell from 50% to around 29%. This obviously was a positive sign for Brazilian-US relations, but this does mean that if Trump wanted to escalate tensions here, he would have space to do so. However, I do believe that there is room for cooperation in trade between Brazil and the United States that would be to both nations' benefits. There are also ways that Brazil can benefit individually from trade with both the United States and China. Brazil is also less susceptible to potential weaponization that the United States might seek to pursue against other nations in South America. The first strength that Brazil possesses is its strong soybean industry. When US-China trade tensions were at their most elevated last year, China reduced its purchases of US soybeans. Instead, they bought Brazilian soybeans, and this was dramatically hurting US farmers. If US-China trade tensions did escalate once again in 2026, I expect the same to occur, with China repivoting to purchasing Brazilian soybeans. This is one area of vulnerability for the United States that, if ultimately weaponized once again in the superpower geopolitical conflict between the United States and China, that Brazil would ultimately benefit from. Despite Brazil potentially benefiting from the United States' weakness, if China decided to ditch US soybeans once again, there does exist an area of potential cooperation between Brazil and the United States. This could be in rare earth elements. The United States is very clearly focused in the Western Hemisphere and is seeking to diversify away from Chinese rare earths. This has been seen in the United States' pursuits in Greenland, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as we discussed a few episodes ago, and with their build-out of a domestic rare earths industry within the United States. Brazil's rare earth industry could be of great interest to Trump and the United States, and this could be a base upon which positive trade relations could be built between the two nations. If we focus more on Brazil in isolation, in 2026, Brazilian domestic politics will undergo some key events. In October of 2026, a presidential election will take place. Trump would likely prefer a right-wing candidate. this candidate likely won't be former President Jair Bolsonaro, who is currently under arrest with a 27-year sentence for an attempted coup. Also, Bolsonaro's health is declining, with multiple hospital visits to address an abdominal stab wound that he received during a 2018 campaign rally. Lula will seek a fourth non-consecutive term against fragmented opposition. Bolsonaro has given his son his full endorsement. This could somewhat affect the October election, but the governor of Sao Paulo, Tarcísio de Freitas, has also been tipped as a key player in the presidential race. As of October 2024, Lula had an approval rating of 46%. When trade tensions between the United States and Brazil were elevated, Lula's approval rating actually increased. As a result of this could disincentivize Trump from returning to an environment of elevated trade tensions, because this could help Lula and his performance in Brazil's 2026 presidential election. Despite this, I wouldn't expect Trump to remain completely silent when it comes to Brazil's election. But Trump is no longer stirring the pot regarding Bolsonaro. Politically, Brazil does look very stable on paper, and at the current point that we are at today, a Lula victory would be expected. One notable aspect of this election that I do expect will play a key role is artificial intelligence. Other notable geopolitical issues in 2026 that could emerge for Brazil include a Mercosur EU deal, which France and Ireland are set to reject alongside Poland, Hungary, and Austria. Despite this, in recent weeks, we did see 21 other nations approve the deal. As we move forward in 2026, we will see how this trade deal progresses. Also, Brazil could face some fiscal pressures in 2026. In 2024, Brazil recorded a current account deficit of $9 billion in December. The annual deficit reached 2.55% of GDP. Despite some reform, fiscal rules remain fragile and vulnerable to political and economic shocks in Brazil. In other economic developments, Brazil could face spillover from China's deflation trap. China exports disinflation to Brazil, but weakened Chinese demand could reduce commodity exports from Brazil. This likely wouldn't have a strong impact, as other nations would likely come to Brazil to export these key resources. But the connection here is notable, especially for steel, petrochemicals, apparel, and the automotive industries. In 2026, I expect Brazil to continue along a positive geopolitical trajectory. Based on the nations that we've analysed so far in this 2026 scenario analysis series, I believe that's the first time that I've stated that outright. Brazil's relative strength in comparison to the other nations in South America will see it relatively insulated from the Monroe Doctrine. If the United States does seek to enact trade pressure, this could strengthen Lula's political position, and this will have key consequences for Brazil's election in 2026. Still, with the United States very clearly pursuing the Monroe Doctrine, Brazil will have to keep one eye on the borders that surround it. A key border is Brazil's border with Venezuela, where the United States recently underwent their recent military excursion. Spillover effects will likely be minimal if cooperation between the United States and Venezuela remains stable, but this is certainly something that Brazil will be keeping an eye on. As a consequence of the United States and their recent operation in Venezuela, Brazil will likely be able to divert attention away from Guyana. Venezuela holds territorial disputes with Guyana over the Essequibo region, but with the United States and its active participation in Venezuela, Venezuela very clearly has enough on its plate, and Brazil will likely have a reduced geopolitical regional stability role here. This will give Brazil more time to focus on continuing to improve its own geopolitical standing in 2026. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a review on the podcast platform of your choice. It really helps out the podcast. I've been Dylan, and I'll talk to you next time.